Welcome to the program. I'm Chris Ullman. It's a week since the federal government suspended live cattle exports to Indonesia, and now thousands are in limbo in stockyards around Australia. Beef producers warn that with each day their costs rise and the burden spreads to more industries. Today the coalition stepped up its attack on the government, saying the blanket ban is a mistake. But there are signs the live export trade could soon resume to some Indonesian abattoirs. For the government, that will be a delicate balancing act. Sara Everingham reports.
Adam Hill has been working in the live export industry for the last 15 years. But this is one of the most difficult times he's faced in the business. It's a week since the government announced its suspension of the live export trade to Indonesia, and each hour is burning a hole in his pocket.
It's a very costly exercise, and not only that, the value of the cattle themselves has dropped by a significant amount since the suspension was announced. And I think that that's going to impact heavily on the exporters and the producers alike.
The industry estimates 17,000 cattle due for export are now in limbo. For both exporters and producers, the bill is mounting. Adam Hill says it costs $8 a day to feed and water each animal.
We need the pathway forward into reinstating the trade into Indonesia worked out as fast as possible. There's really no time to sit around and hold the show up any longer.
The industry is still catching up with the government's directive.
Well, I'm very concerned about the tens of thousands of animals that are currently in the chain. And that's the reason why getting the trade moving again is so important. There simply aren't options in most cases to just send them back to the paddock.
Beef producers in the Northern Territory say the impact of the suspension goes well beyond the yards holding cattle.
We have a lot of compounding issues, social issues around people who effectively have lost their livelihood, families that are involved directly in the industry, indirectly truck drivers, shopkeepers, everybody that supplies the industry.
The dry season is a critical time for moving cattle for live export, and beef producers are looking for answers.
Producers are having to make decisions about whether they spend money and whether they muster cattle. Clearly, there's a lack of definition at the moment about how long this is going to take.
The coalition says the government's blanket ban was a mistake that's left the industry in the lurch.
Plainly, there are at least some abattoirs in Indonesia which comply with Australian standards, and the live export trade to those abattoirs should be resumed immediately.
Those on the other side are all at sea in relation to this point. They don't know whether they want animal welfare outcomes to be upheld or not.
Beef producers in the Northern Territory want trade resumed to abattoirs working to Australian standards. The Nationals leader, Warren Truss, wants to see that happen in a matter of days, advocating a cattle tracking system that could guarantee cattle sent to Indonesia are slaughtered in approved abattoirs.
Well, the National Livestock Identification Scheme has been in place in most of Australia now for several years, but there was a concession given to the Northern Australian cattle industry which was largely export-oriented. Now, I think that concession has outlived its usefulness, and it's going to be essential now to be able to track animals overseas as well.
Industry insiders suggest some headway is being made now to perhaps clear a way to get cattle to the approved abattoirs in Indonesia, but they say there's still a lot of work to be done.
This government is working diligently to ensure that the trade can be put back in place whilst maintaining appropriate animal welfare outcomes.
There's no doubt there will be close scrutiny of any agreement.
Our concern is what does approved mean and what standards do those abattoirs have? How will we be sure that animals can be traced all the way through the supply chain? How do we know how well trained the people within those abattoirs are? There's a whole lot of questions that need to be answered.
The RSPCA says animals must be knocked unconscious before slaughter.
And that we are assured that every animal going into Indonesia will be stunned in an upright position prior to slaughter. That is really important because that is the least that we could expect.
In the meantime, the federal government wants the industry body, Meat and Livestock Australia, to pay $5 million compensation to cover the producers' and exporters' costs. But the government's running into trouble there too. It looks like it will have to force the organisation to dip into contingency funds. But beef producers maintain they're more interested in getting back to work.
The flow has to commence, and it has to commence quite quickly. Otherwise, we're heading for a train wreck of mammoth proportions.
Sara Everingham reporting. We did invite the Federal Agriculture Minister Joe Ludwig on the program last night and tonight. He's unavailable.